The paperwork was already signed. 5 days left. And the most dangerous dog in the facility had just gone completely silent for the first time in 2 years. Nobody could explain it. Nobody except maybe the man standing in front of that cage. The motorcycle pulled into the parking lot just after 2 in the afternoon. No security. No assistant. No one checking the perimeter or holding a clipboard. Just Keanu Reeves, a worn leather jacket, and a helmet he set quietly on the seat before standing there for a moment, looking up at the building like he was deciding something he'd already decided a dozen times and kept walking away from. The sign above the entrance read, Pacific Shore K-9 Rescue, San Diego, California. He had been here before in his mind. Talked himself into it, talked himself back out. For months, his house in the hills felt wrong in a way he couldn't name. Too quiet, too still. Duke had been gone almost a year, and the absence of that dog. The sound of him, the weight of him sleeping at the foot of the bed, the way he'd press against Keanu's leg during the hard nights, had become its own kind of noise. So he was here. Finally. He walked inside. The woman at the front desk looked up and did a small double take she quickly tried to hide. Her name tag read Sam Porter. Short dark hair. The slightly exhausted look of someone who genuinely cared about this job and was therefore always tired. Mr. Reeves, she said, extending a hand.
Sam.
We spoke on the phone. Just Keanu, he said. She gave a small nod, okay, sure, and led him down the main corridor. The smell hit first. Disinfectant. Wet fur. Something warm underneath it all that was harder to name. Dogs pressed against kennel doors as they passed, tails going. Some barked. Some just watched with those enormous, hopeful eyes that dogs somehow manage to maintain even after everything. Sam talked as they walked. This one's 2 years old, great with kids. This one's a little shy at first but comes around fast. This one was found abandoned at a rest stop outside Bakersfield and took 3 weeks to stop flinching at sudden movement. Keanu listened. He stopped at a few of the kennels, let the dogs smell his hand. They were good dogs. Every one of them. But something kept pulling him forward. They reached a heavy steel door at the end of the hallway. A sign on it read, Restricted Area, Staff Only. Sam's pace quickened slightly, just a fraction. Keanu noticed. Then the sound came. It didn't sound like barking. Not exactly. It was deeper than that, more ragged, like something tearing itself apart from the inside. The steel door shook with it. The sound bounced off the concrete walls and hung in the air long after it had ended, leaving a kind of ringing. Keanu stopped walking. What's back there?
Sam hesitated.
A beat too long. Isolation ward. Dogs that aren't available for adoption. Why not? Behavioral cases. Some of them are too dangerous to rehome safely. 2 staff members came out of a side room just behind them, mid-conversation, not noticing Keanu until it was too late. Nearly bent the bars again this morning. 5 more days. The paperwork's already signed. Should have been done a long time ago, honestly. They saw him. Stopped. One of them went visibly red. They muttered something and moved quickly down the hall. Keanu turned back to Sam. 5 days, he said. Sam let out a slow breath. Shadow is scheduled to be euthanized at the end of the week. Director Holloway made the call. He's been here almost 2 years. He's attacked 3 of our staff. One of them needed reconstructive surgery on his forearm. Nobody can get near him without. Another bark exploded from behind the door. Not the sound of an animal that wanted attention. The sound of an animal that had been alone for so long it had forgotten there was anything else. Tell me about him, Keanu said. Sam told him in the hallway, standing in the flickering fluorescent light while the everyday sounds of the facility drifted around them. Shadow was a German Shepherd, 7 years old. Retired police K-9, formerly with the Portland PD, one of their best by all accounts. Explosive detection, tracking, suspect apprehension. Decorated twice in 5 years of service. His handler's name was Officer Daniel Reyes. 5 years they worked together. Sam said the word together the way people say it when they mean something more than professional. Partners in the real sense. Daniel would bring Shadow to family cookouts. would run him on the beach at sunrise before a shift. On long assignments away from home, it was the dog he called his wife to ask about first. Then, about 2.5 years ago, they were sent to a warehouse on the east side of Portland. A drug operation. Intelligence called it routine. It wasn't. They walked into an ambush. In the chaos, one of the gunmen took aim at Shadow. Daniel Reyes saw it. He didn't think about it. He stepped in front of his dog. The bullet went through his chest. He died on that warehouse floor, Shadow beside him, before help arrived. According to the report, Shadow refused to leave the body for 4 hours. He howled until his voice was gone. When officers finally managed to pull him away, something had cracked open inside that dog that never healed back right. Sam stopped talking for a second. Somewhere in the building, a phone rang and went unanswered. "He's been here since the department transferred him," she said finally. 3 staff hospitalizations. Nobody gets within arm's reach. Holloway's been trying to find an alternative for over a year, but she shook her head slowly. There isn't one. Not anymore. Keanu was quiet for a moment. Outside the steel door, Shadow had gone silent again. "I want to see him," Keanu said. "Keanu." "I know," he said. "I still want to see him." There was nothing to argue against. No aggression, no demand, just a quiet statement from a man who had already made up his mind. Sam studied his face for a moment, searching for recklessness. She didn't find it. She pulled out her keycard. The isolation ward was colder, dimmer. The noise of the main facility faded behind the steel door as they walked down the corridor, past empty kennels, toward the one at the far end with extra reinforcing bars and 3 warning signs plastered on the wall beside it. Shadow stood at the back of his kennel. He was large, powerfully built, with the kind of presence that fills a space. Black and tan coat gone a little dull from years without proper sunlight. Ears pinned flat against his skull. Every muscle in his body coiled and ready. He saw them. He moved. The lunge was terrifying in the way that fast, large things are terrifying. The speed of it didn't register until it had already happened. His body hit the reinforced bars with a sound like a car door slamming full force. The kennel shook. Staff members at the far end of the corridor grabbed tranquilizer poles. Someone shouted for Keanu to step back. Keanu didn't step back. He stood there, hands loose at his sides, and watched Shadow throw himself against those bars again and again. Snarling, teeth fully bared, eyes blown wide and wild. The sound was enormous in that small space. Then Shadow stopped. Just stopped. Mid-snarl, mid-motion. His chest heaved. His breath came in ragged pulls. His nostrils worked rapidly, pulling in something that had reached him through the fury. Something that confused him. He tilted his head, the smallest degree, and looked at Keanu. Not at the group. At Keanu specifically. The silence stretched out. 10 seconds. 15. Staff members exchanged glances. This wasn't how it went with Shadow. By now he should have been in a full frenzy, unreachable, exhausting himself against the bars. Instead he was just standing there, watching, waiting. Then Shadow made a sound that Sam later said she hadn't heard from him once in 2 years. Not a growl, not a bark. A low, trembling whine, the kind that comes from somewhere behind the ribs. The sound of something that has been braced against pain for so long that it no longer remembers what it felt like before. Keanu's jaw tightened. His hand moved slowly to the pocket of his jacket. Sam whispered, "I've never seen him do that." Shadow's tail moved. Once. The smallest possible motion, barely there, barely more than a question. Keanu reached into his pocket and held out what was inside. A leather dog collar. Old, soft with years of use, the metal tag worn down but still catching the dim light. Duke's collar. He'd carried it every day since the morning he'd held that dog and felt him go still in his arms. Shadow's nostrils flared. He took 1 step forward. Then another, slow and careful, entirely unlike the animal that had just been throwing himself at the bars. He pressed his nose through the space between the metal and into Keanu's open palm, and breathed in long and deep, and stayed there, Sam's hand went over her mouth. The most dangerous dog in the facility stood with his muzzle resting in a stranger's hand like a dog half his age falling asleep in the sun. "I want to go inside." Keanu said it quietly when director Frank Holloway arrived. Holloway was tall, gray-suited, with the manner of a man who had seen too many good intentions turn into liability claims and emergency room visits. He'd recognized Keanu immediately, and it hadn't softened him any. "No," he said flatly. "I understand your concern," Keanu said. "Then you understand this conversation is finished." He turned to the two security guards who'd come with him. "Please walk Mr. Reeves out to the main wing." The guards looked at each other. Keanu walked to the wall beside Shadow's kennel, lowered himself to the floor, and sat down. Holloway stared at him. "What are you doing?" "Waiting." "For what?" "For you to change your mind. You can't just. This is a restricted area." "I'm not blocking anything," Keanu said. "I'm not threatening anyone. I'm just sitting. I'll call the police." "That's your right." One of the security guards cleared his throat carefully. "Sir, if we remove him physically and it gets out to the press." "I'm not threatening to go to the press," Keanu said, looking up at Holloway. "I just want to sit here." Holloway's face went through several stages. He stood there for a moment, then another moment, then left without saying anything, his footsteps sharp and deliberate on the concrete. 30 minutes passed. Keanu didn't check his phone, didn't fidget. He sat with his back against the wall and occasionally glanced toward the kennel with an expression that was difficult to read. Shadow had moved to the front of his cage. He lay down on the concrete, his head resting on his paws, his eyes fixed on the man sitting against the wall. The aggressive energy that usually radiated from him like heat had gone somewhere else. He looked, for the first time in a long time, like he was simply watching someone he found interesting. Sam found Holloway standing near his office window, arms crossed, looking down the corridor. "Look at him," she said quietly. Holloway's eyes moved to Shadow. The dog hadn't shifted in 20 minutes. His body was still, his gaze steady, his breathing slow. "He's never done this," Sam said. "Not with anyone. Not once." Holloway didn't answer for a long time. When he finally spoke, it came out through something that cost him. "Get the tranquilizer team in position. I want full staff on standby. And I want it formally on record that I advised against this." Sam nodded quickly. "Of course." She went to Keanu. He agreed. "You can go in." Keanu looked up at her. Quiet, brief smile. "Thank you." He rose slowly. Staff took positions around the kennel. Tranquilizer rifles were loaded and ready. Holloway stood at the far end of the corridor, arms still crossed, watching with the particular expression of a man waiting to be proven right. Sam unlocked the kennel. The heavy door swung open with a creak of metal. Shadow was on his feet the instant he heard the lock disengage. Lips pulled back. The low rumble starting in his chest again, old and deep. His body coiled. His eyes locked on the opening. Keanu stepped inside. He stopped 8 feet from the dog and did something that made several of the watching staff shift uncomfortably. He knelt down. Not dramatically, not carefully calculated. He just made himself smaller, reduced the threat of himself, kept his gaze soft and slightly off to the side. His hands rested open on his knees. He could have been waiting for a bus. "Hey, Shadow." His voice was low enough that nobody else could hear it clearly. "I know you lost him. I lost mine too." Shadow's growl faltered. His ears moved back, forward, back again. Uncertain reception. Keanu reached into his pocket and held out the collar. The scent reached Shadow immediately. Everything in the dog's body shifted. Not relaxed, not yet, but the aggression moved sideways into something more confused and searching. He took a step forward. Then another. His nose dropped to the worn leather and he breathed it in slowly, carefully, like he was reading something written in a language he almost remembered. He raised his head and looked directly at Keanu. Something moved through those dark eyes. Shadow walked the last few steps and pressed his head against Keanu's chest. Not a nudge. Not a warning. He pressed there and stayed, his breathing gradually slowing, his body settling into the contact with the slow release of something that had been held under pressure for a very long time. Keanu's arms came up carefully around the dog's neck. Shadow trembled once, then went still. Across the room, Sam was crying. A couple of the staff members had lowered their equipment without noticing they'd done it. Holloway, at the far end of the corridor, uncrossed his arms. Then the ground moved. It started as a vibration you felt in your feet before you named it. A low, building tremor that seemed to come from somewhere far below everything. Then it climbed, fast and sudden, from tremor to shudder to something that had no good word for it. The lights overhead flickered, died. An emergency alarm began its flat, panicked scream. Somewhere in the building, a window exploded inward. The floor lurched sideways, then back, and in every kennel in the facility, every dog began to bark at once. A wall of sound that hit like something physical. Earthquake. The isolation ward's security system activated automatically. A fail-safe designed to prevent dangerous animals from escaping during structural emergencies. The steel doors sealed shut with a sound like a vault closing. Keanu and Shadow were inside. The ceiling cracked above them, a jagged line splitting the concrete like something tearing paper. A chunk came loose and hit the floor 3 feet away in a cloud of dust. Then another. The emergency lighting failed completely, leaving only the orange glow of electrical fires that had sparked in the wiring along the walls. Small flames, but spreading, and they brought smoke with them. Keanu moved on instinct, pulling Shadow close and turning his back to the falling debris. Something caught his left leg. A sharp-edged piece of concrete coming down from above, tearing through his jeans and into the flesh just below the knee. The pain was immediate and deep. He reached down, felt blood on his fingers, tried to stand. His leg folded. He went back down to one knee, breathing hard through his teeth. Shadow was beside him instantly, licking his face, whining. Not the distressed, unfocused whining of a panicked animal, but something more purposeful. The dog was reading him the way working dogs read their handlers, cataloging, assessing, trying to understand the problem. "I'm okay," Keanu said, which was only partially true. He looked toward the emergency exit at the far end of the ward. 50 feet, maybe 60. The smoke was building steadily, dropping toward the floor, reducing visibility with every passing minute. Through the haze, one of the small electrical fires had caught a stack of supply boxes and was growing faster now. They needed to move. "Go," Keanu said, gesturing toward the exit. "Shadow, go. Find help. Go." Shadow didn't move. "Shadow. Firmer now. Go." The dog gripped the sleeve of Keanu's leather jacket between his teeth and pulled. Keanu looked at him for a half-second. Then he grabbed Shadow's collar with both hands, got his good leg under him, and used the dog as an anchor to drag himself forward. They moved like that, Keanu hauling himself across the concrete, pushing with his good leg, pulling on Shadow's collar, Shadow bearing the weight and pulling forward at the same time, an ungainly, grinding, painful process that covered maybe 2 feet per minute. The smoke thickened around them. Twice Keanu had to press his face close to the floor to breathe. Each time Shadow stood over him and waited. Not impatiently, not frantically, with the focused, present calm of a dog who has been trained to work through chaos and hasn't forgotten how. The fire behind them had found something new to eat. The heat was noticeable now. They reached the emergency exit door. Keanu pushed against it with his shoulder. Locked. The electronic mechanism had engaged with the rest of the security system when the power cut. Without a manual override from outside, the door wasn't opening. Shadow understood before Keanu said anything. He turned to the door, planted his feet, and barked. Not the bark of fear, not the bark of aggression. The trained, rhythmic bark of a police dog executing a signal, loud, regular, each one precise, designed to carry distance and cut through ambient noise. "Here. This way. Come here. Outside." Sam heard it from the evacuation point 40 yards from the building. She was standing with a cluster of staff in the parking lot, dust still settling from the last aftershock, sirens converging from 3 directions, someone nearby talking into a phone in a tight, controlled voice. She'd been counting heads and coming up one short and trying not to think about what that meant. Then she heard it, cutting through everything else, the sirens, the alarms, the noise of the crowd. She knew that cadence. She'd worked with enough police dogs to know exactly what it meant. She was running before she'd made the decision. Someone called her name. She didn't stop. The corridors inside were wrong in the way that only buildings get after earthquakes. Familiar geometry turned unreliable, the floor subtly uneven, beams down in places they shouldn't be, the walls showing cracks that hadn't been there an hour ago. She moved fast, one hand trailing the wall for reference, following the sound of barking until she found the emergency exit panel mounted beside the sealed door. Glass panel. Manual release lever behind it. She drove her elbow into the glass and pulled the lever with both hands. The door gave with a clunk of disengaging metal. Shadow came through first, still gripping Keanu's jacket sleeve, backpedaling hard with his whole body. Pulling. Sam dropped to her knees and grabbed Keanu's arm, and together, the dog pulling, Sam pulling, they got him the rest of the way through, down the last corridor, and out through the exterior door. The evening air hit them all at once. Keanu lay on the grass and stayed there for a moment, just breathing. The sky above him was the particular orange of late afternoon, absolutely indifferent to everything that had just happened below it. Behind them, a section of the isolation ward's roof came down. The sound of it was enormous. Then the dust cloud rolled out over the parking lot, and then there was just the sirens. Shadow stood over Keanu, sides heaving, panting hard. He didn't move away from him. He stood there and breathed and watched Keanu's face with the specific attention of a dog who needs to confirm, with his own eyes, that the person is still here. Sam sat in the grass beside them. For a while, none of them said anything. Paramedics were setting up triage on the far side of the parking lot. Keanu's leg was cleaned and wrapped efficiently. He refused the stretcher and sat against an equipment case with Shadow's head on his knee, watching the organized chaos of first response with the slightly detached expression of someone who has recently had a large amount of adrenaline leave their system all at once. Sam sat nearby, running through her mental head count. She came up short again. Where's Holloway? Silence from the people around her. One of the junior staff pointed toward the east wing of the building. Part of the roofline had buckled there. A wall had partially failed. Emergency crews were already establishing a perimeter, shouting at people to stay back from the structure. He went back in about 10 minutes before the second aftershock, the staff member said. Said he needed something from his office. Sam looked at Shadow. Shadow had already raised his head. His ears were forward. His nose was working, processing something on the air, some specific information carried in the smell of dust and smoke that had reached him while Sam was still registering the situation with her eyes. She watched the shift happen in his body, the focus that came into him. He was on his feet before she could say anything. Shadow! He was already running, not toward safety, toward the building, toward the east wing, toward the worst of it. A dark shape moving at full speed across the parking lot and disappearing into the dust. Keanu pushed himself up on one arm and watched him go. He didn't call him back. The east corridor was bad. A load-bearing wall had failed, bringing down most of the ceiling in a 12-foot section. The hallway was blocked by concrete and twisted metal framing, passable only through a narrow gap near the floor. Dust so thick it cut visibility to a few feet. Holloway was 30 feet past the collapse, pinned under a section of wall. Not crushed. The debris had come down at an angle that trapped rather than destroyed. His legs completely immobilized, his upper body free. He was conscious. Head laceration from flying material, blood drying on his face, breathing shallow and tight. His walkie-talkie had skittered out of reach when he fell. He'd been shouting for 7 minutes. His voice was going. He heard the dog before he saw it. Movement in the dust. Low to the ground, moving fast and purposeful. Then Shadow emerged from the haze, found Holloway with his eyes, and stopped. The two of them looked at each other. Holloway had spent the last 2 years making decisions about this animal. He knew exactly what this dog had done to the people who'd gotten close to him. He knew he was lying on the floor, unable to move his legs, completely alone, in a collapsed building, with no one else around. He closed his eyes. Shadow barked. Not at Holloway. The dog planted himself 2 feet away and barked in the direction of the entrance. Loud, rhythmic, carrying, each bark precisely spaced. A signal, a beacon, the bark of a dog that has been trained to guide people to a location and has not forgotten how to do it. The rescue team found them 4 minutes later. Flashlight beams cutting through the dust. Boots carefully over rubble. Voices calling and then finding. They found a man trapped under a section of collapsed wall, and beside him, a dog that hadn't moved. They brought Holloway out on a stretcher.
Bruised legs, no fractures.
Head laceration that needed stitches. He was conscious and tracking, blinking in the evening light as they carried him across the parking lot toward the medical area. Shadow trotted alongside the stretcher. When they set it down near the triage station, Holloway turned his head. Keanu was there, sitting on the ground, his bandaged legs stretched out, watching. Shadow moved to him first, pressed against his side, settled, and then turned to look back at Holloway. Holloway looked at the dog for a long time. "He found me," he said. The quality of his voice was different than it had been before. Something had been scraped out of it. Keanu nodded. Holloway was quiet for a moment. When he spoke again, he wasn't talking to Keanu exactly. He was talking to the space in front of him, working something out. "I had documentation. I had 3 staff injury reports. I had protocol built over 20 years. A pause. I was absolutely certain." He said it the way people say things when they're no longer sure certainty was worth what they paid for it. He looked at Sam, who was standing nearby. "Cancel the order. Cancel everything on Shadow." He stopped for a moment. "And get me the transfer paperwork. I want to sign it myself." 3 months later, on a Tuesday morning, the Pacific Shore K-9 rescue reopened. The damaged wings had been rebuilt. The isolation ward had been converted into a rehabilitation space. Better lighting, longer runs, 2 specialists in canine trauma response on staff 3 days a week. The parking lot had more press in it than the facility had seen in its entire history. Holloway stood at the podium in front of the building. He looked like a man who had spent 3 months sitting with something uncomfortable and come out the other side with less certainty and more clarity. Not the same thing and not always a fair trade, but real. "I built my approach on the belief that some animals are beyond recovery," he said. He wasn't reading from notes. "I had data that supported it. I had protocol that codified it. And I was wrong." He didn't flinch from the cameras. "The dog I had scheduled for euthanasia found me under a collapsed wall and stayed until the rescue team arrived. I don't have a framework that accounts for that. What I have is the responsibility to do something useful with it." He announced the Second Opportunity Initiative, a rehabilitation program for dogs classified as behaviorally unadoptable, developed in partnership with the UC San Diego Veterinary Behavioral Program and the San Diego VA Medical Center. First-year projection: 200 dogs who would otherwise have been euthanized. In the audience, Shadow sat beside Keanu's chair. Keanu had brought Shadow home to Los Angeles 3 days after the earthquake. The first weeks were hard in ways he hadn't fully anticipated. Shadow had spent 2 years teaching himself that the safest option was to drive everyone away before they could leave on their own. That's not an instinct that disappears because the circumstances change. It's a strategy that worked. You don't easily give up strategies that worked. He'd wake at night 2-3 in the morning and pace, moving room to room in the dark, nails quiet on the hardwood, sometimes stopping in the middle of the floor for long minutes before moving again. Sometimes a low whimper that he seemed unaware of. Old footage playing somewhere behind his eyes. A warehouse, gunfire, a weight beside him that slowly stopped being warm. Each time Keanu got up, he didn't try to interrupt the pacing or redirect it or make it stop. He'd just appear in whatever room Shadow had moved to, lower himself to the floor, and sit there. No commands. No comfort that felt manufactured. Just presence. "I'm here. Nothing needs to happen. I'm not going anywhere. Cost him sleep. He paid it. By the 5th week, Shadow had stopped pacing as far. By the 7th, he'd started sleeping on the floor beside the bed rather than across the room. Some mornings Keanu would wake to find Shadow's chin resting on the mattress edge, watching him in the early light with an expression that was impossible to fully read but felt, somehow, like progress. By 3 months, he was running at full speed on the beach at Malibu, chasing birds he had no intention of catching, his coat bright in the morning sun, his whole body moving with a freedom it had clearly been storing somewhere, waiting. Keanu watched from down the beach and felt something loosen in his own chest. It was Sam who connected them with the Veterans Program. She called on a Wednesday afternoon, a group at the San Diego VA, combat veterans working through PTSD in various stages of managed and unmanaged. She'd been running animal-assisted therapy sessions with them for months. "I don't have a dog like Shadow," she said simply. "I mean that in the specific way, not the general way." They started going twice a month.
No cameras. No announcements.
Keanu would park in the regular lot, and he and Shadow would walk through the hospital corridors, and Shadow would do what Shadow did. Move through a room methodically, reading each person, stopping where he stopped. He always knew. There was a man named Thomas. 2 tours. Army. He'd been at the VA for 5 months and had, by the staff's accounting, said fewer than 100 words to any of them in that time. Every afternoon he sat by the window in the common room and looked at the parking lot with the specific attention of someone who wasn't looking at the parking lot. Shadow walked past 7 other people to get to Thomas. He lay down at the man's feet and stayed. Nothing happened for a while. The session went on around them. Other dogs, other people, conversations starting and stopping. Thomas didn't move, didn't acknowledge it. Then his hand came down slowly and rested on Shadow's head. His shoulders dropped. His entire body made a small, fundamental rearrangement, like a knot releasing. "He doesn't need me to explain anything," Thomas said. He was addressing no one in particular. His voice was rough from disuse, but it was there. "He already knows." Keanu was across the room. He didn't say anything. Walking back to the car afterward, Shadow close at his heel, Keanu thought about what Thomas had said. He already knows. He thought about what it means to be understood without explanation, about Duke, about the particular silence of coming home to a dog who had been waiting. The way Duke would press against his leg without needing to know what kind of day it had been. Somehow that was always exactly the right response to any kind of day. He thought about how long it had taken him to come back to any of this. He reached down and scratched behind Shadow's ears. Shadow leaned into his hand with his full body weight, which he always did, as if making sure Keanu felt it. The American Hero Dog Award ceremony was held in Washington, D.C. in February. The venue seated 400 people and had, somehow, a waiting list. When they called Shadow's name, the room stood up before Keanu had taken 2 steps toward the podium. He stood there for a moment with his hand on Shadow's back, looking out at all those people. He leaned toward the microphone. "I came to that shelter to help a dog," he said. "That's not what happened." He stepped back. The applause went on long enough that it started to feel like something else. Like people weren't just clapping for the story they'd heard, but for something it had reminded them of. Something they hoped was true. The moment everyone in that room remembered afterward came a few minutes later. A woman in the front row stood up. She was in her early 60s. Silver hair worn simply. She moved carefully with the deliberate quality of someone carrying something fragile. She walked toward the stage without anyone directing her, and the room seemed to understand instinctively that it should wait. Her name was Rosa Reyes, Daniel's mother. Shadow saw her coming when she was still 15 feet away. His ears went fully forward. His nostrils worked rapidly. He took 1 step toward her and then went still. The still of a dog who has recognized something. She knelt in front of him, both knees on the stage floor. She put her hands on either side of his face and looked at him, and the tears were already there before she spoke. "You stayed with him," she said. Her voice broke on almost every syllable and kept going anyway, the way voices do when something has been waiting to be said for a very long time. You stayed with my boy until the end. I needed to tell you that. I just needed you to know that I—" She couldn't finish the sentence. Shadow pressed his muzzle gently against her cheek. She held him. He leaned into her the way he had leaned into Keanu on the floor of that kennel, giving weight, giving warmth, giving whatever remained of what he had to give. His tail moved slowly, back and forth, steady and quiet. The auditorium was absolutely silent. Keanu stood nearby. His eyes were wet. He didn't speak. Some moments are damaged by words. They went back to San Diego a week after the ceremony. Not to the rescue. To the beach south of the pier, at the hour when the sun goes serious about setting and the light comes in sideways and orange over the water, making everything look briefly like it's made of something worth keeping. Keanu sat in the sand. Shadow arranged himself beside him and then gradually into lying down, head on Keanu's knee, eyes half closed. The ocean did what it always does, indifferent and consistent, waves coming in and pulling back on their own schedule. Keanu turned Duke's old collar over in his hands for a while. Then he reached over and touched the collar around Shadow's neck. There was an engraving on the inside of the tag, something he'd had put there before bringing Shadow home, words he came back to whenever he needed to. He read them now. What broke us doesn't have to be all we are. Not a philosophy, not a lesson, just the truth of it as far as he understood it. Duke would have liked you, he said. Shadow's ear twitched. His eyes stayed half closed. His breathing was slow and even. The sun finished its work on the horizon and the sky moved through orange to pink to purple to the deep blue that comes just before dark. Stars came up one at a time, tentative, then more certain. The beach emptied gradually around them until it was just the two of them and the sound of the water. The Second Opportunity Initiative placed over 300 dogs in its first year. Some went to families. Some went into service, therapy programs, veteran centers, search and rescue. Holloway spoke at a national animal welfare conference in Chicago that spring, a careful and slightly stiff man who had spent his career building certainties and had then had them methodically taken apart by a German shepherd in a collapsed building. I made my decisions based on worst moments, he told the conference. The problem is that worst moments are real, but they're not complete. They're not the whole story. He paused. I don't think I was capable of hearing that until I experienced it personally. I wish I'd been capable of hearing it sooner. It wasn't a rousing speech. Several people in the audience wrote it down anyway. Shadow lived well. He slept on the couch when he thought Keanu wasn't looking, and Keanu let him. He had an ongoing and serious issue with squirrels, not violent, just intensely principled. He was genuinely fond of the woman who ran the coffee cart near the beach path in Malibu, who kept treats in her apron pocket and called him Mijo and always had time for him even when the line was long. He still had bad nights sometimes. The kind where something in a dream would pull him back to that warehouse, to the cold concrete floor, to the smell of gunfire and the weight of a body beside him that had stopped being warm. He'd wake panting, eyes wide and dark, the past sitting heavily on his chest. And Keanu would be there, sitting on the floor in the dark, hand resting lightly on Shadow's back, not saying anything, not trying to fix it or explain it away, just staying, waiting for the past to loosen its grip, the way it eventually does, when the present is patient enough with it.